Welcome to today's Explainer. What happens when the exact people handing out billions in public funds have a private financial stake in the outcome? Today, we're unpacking a massive, real-world-inspired institutional dilemma that tests the very foundations of public trust and governance ethics.
Let's talk scale because it is literally staggering. We're looking at a government-created RDI fund, that's Research, Development and Innovation, sitting on a massive 1 lakh crore rupees. The noble goal was to boost private investment in deep tech sectors, things like artificial intelligence, quantum tech, biotechnology, and semiconductors. To manage this massive pool of money, they formed an investment committee, bringing in top industry and technical experts to evaluate proposals and distribute the funds.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with the RDI fund controversy itself, break down the real meaning of conflict of interest, step into the shoes of a decision-maker named Dr. Nisha Kapoor, map out the stakeholders, weigh our ethical options, and finally, look at some real institutional reforms.
All right, Part 1, the RDI fund controversy. Things really kicked off when the Science Minister, Jitendra Singh, made a huge disclosure in Parliament. He revealed that out of the 11 investment committee members handing out this money, 7 of them had personal financial stakes in 15 of the specific tech companies chosen to receive funding. That's a majority of the committee with direct ties to the beneficiaries. Now sure, finding experts in super niche fields like quantum tech who don't have industry ties is incredibly tough, but man, the optics here, absolutely alarming.
The government immediately jumped in to defend the committee's integrity. They said, hey, we followed strict conflict of interest safeguards. They pointed out their recusal policy. Basically, if you have a stake, you step out of the room during the vote. They highlighted supermajority voting and argued that any personal investments made after a funding approval were just independent business decisions. But, this brings us right to a huge debate, the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law.
Which leads us to Section 2, Understanding Conflict of Interest, and the blurry line between what's technically legal and what's ethically sound.
This is where it gets fascinating. We constantly blur the lines between technical legality and public confidence. On one side, you have actual conflict of interest. That's your textbook rule-breaking or proven bias. But on the flip side, we have perceived conflict of interest. Even if a committee member recuses themselves and steps out, just the fact that they have stakes completely damages public trust. It goes back to that classic legal saying, justice must not only be done, it must be seen to be done. Knowing a company is about to get a massive injection of government cash creates a huge temptation to invest. That is a textbook abuse of information asymmetry.
Let's look at this conceptual map from our source to really ground this. It shows us that having honest individuals simply isn't enough. We need solid, systemic, institutional design. Take probity and governance. It basically means just following the law isn't the ceiling. You need moral credibility. Transparency? Sure. Disclosure is necessary. But is it truly sufficient? Not really. The public trust doctrine dictates that if you're handling public money, you are held to a much higher moral standard. Meaning, our institutional rules can't just be technically correct. They have to be completely abuse-proof.
Let's put this into practice with a case study in Section 3, Dr. Nisha Kapoor's dilemma. I want you to put yourself directly in the hot seat. Imagine you are Dr. Nisha Kapoor, an independent tech expert sitting on this exact investment committee. During a meeting, a funding proposal comes up for a company where one of your fellow members has a financial stake. Following the rules to a T, your colleague recuses themselves. You and the remaining members vote and the funding is legally approved. Seems fine, right? But a few weeks later, you find out that this exact same colleague just heavily increased their personal investment in that newly funded company. Technically, no rule was broken. Ethically, you are feeling deeply uncomfortable. So what do?
But before you make a snap move, we need to map things out in Section 4, Stakeholders and Interests.
You can't make a decision in a vacuum. You've got 5 key players balancing competing interests here. First, there's you, trying to balance your professional integrity against the total awkwardness of confronting a coworker. Second, your colleague, who is balancing their personal financial gain against their duty. Third, the government and the taxpayers, all of us, who have a right to ethical fund usage. Fourth, the funded company, which deserves a fair evaluation. And finally, think about the other applicant companies who desperately need a level playing field. Any choice you make is going to ripple out to all of them.
All right, Section 5, Evaluating Ethical Options. Let's see what history's greatest ethical frameworks have to say about your choices. Your first option is definitely the easiest path. Just stay silent. The recusal happened, the post-approval investment is technically a private business matter, and hey, no rule was technically broken.
It's the safest move for your career, for sure. But a major philosophical heavyweight would completely rip this approach apart.
Enter Immanuel Kant. He issues a stark warning here, reminding us that confusing mere rule compliance with actual morality is a dangerous trap. If you stay silent just because the letter of the law was followed, you're completely ignoring the spirit and the intent of the process, which is to prevent unfair enrichment. Kant would say that staying silent here is just a false illusion of morality.
Okay, so what about option 2? You could have a private chat with your colleague. You express your discomfort, but you don't file a formal complaint. Actually, scratch that. While it shows a little bit of courage, it totally fails to fix the wider institutional problem at hand. The loophole is still just sitting there, wide open, waiting for the next person to exploit it.
That brings us to the third option, formally reporting your ethical concerns in writing to the chairman, and crucially, suggesting systemic policy changes, like a mandatory cooling-off period for investments. Our source flags this as the absolute best, most ethically sound option. And we've got 3 powerful philosophical concepts to back that up.
First up, John Rawls and his famous veil of ignorance. This brilliantly illustrates why structural reform is necessary. Rawls argues that if we had to design these rules blindly, without knowing if we were going to be the wealthy investor, the taxpayer, or a competing startup, we would absolutely never allow a loophole like this to exist. Objective fairness under the veil of ignorance demands that we close the structural gaps that create asymmetrical advantages. Furthermore, Aristotle would totally applaud this option as the golden mean. It is the perfect balance of virtue. Formally reporting and suggesting policy changes represents true professional courage. You're avoiding the extreme of cowardice, which is staying silent, and you're avoiding the extreme of recklessness, like running straight to the media to start a smear campaign without trying to structurally fix the system.
Finally, we have Mahatma Gandhi's principle of the purity of means. Gandhi insisted that the process matters just as much as the outcome. So even if that final funding decision was legally compliant, the means by which committee members interact with those funds must be pure. Questioning a flawed process isn't just a choice, it's a mandatory duty. Institutional integrity literally has to rank higher than personal convenience every single time.
So, having made the ethically sound choice, let's move to our final section, Path to Institutional Reforms. Let's make these rules abuse-proof.
Our source outlines 4 concrete, forward-moving steps to actually fix the RDI fund's design flaws. First, mandate a 1 to 2 year cooling-off period where committee members simply cannot invest in a company after they approve its funding. Second, take the declaration of interest out of the dark. Publish it publicly. Don't just hide it as an internal HR document. Third, ensure the committee has real diversity by bringing in non-investor experts to balance out the industry insiders. And fourth, implement independent annual audits, strictly following the Second Administrative Reforms Commission guidelines on ethics in governance.
These kinds of systemic reforms are what actually protect both technological innovation and vital public trust. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought derived straight from the source material's homework prompt. Think about the massive scale of these funds, a lakh crore rupees, the complexity of deep tech, and the subtle corrosive dangers of perceived bias. When dealing with this much public money, is simply disclosing a conflict and stepping out of the room for 5 minutes truly enough? Or do our institutions owe us a much higher standard? Take a moment to ponder that, and thank you so much for joining me today to break down this vital ethical case study.